The room was loud with laughter when my mother said it. "You need to stop depending on this family," she said, looking straight at me. "If you're not happy here, maybe it's time you leave." Her voice didn't drop. She didn't hesitate. Forks froze midair. Someone coughed. And then, nothing. No one defended me. No one even looked surprised. I nodded once and kept my eyes on my plate. She leaned back in her chair, confident, like she'd finally said what everyone else had been thinking. Like she'd won something. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I listened. Before I tell you how this turned out, let me say this quietly. If you've ever felt pushed out by people who should have stood by you, tap like, or leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. And if this story reminds you of your own family, feel free to share it. Have you ever been underestimated because you stayed silent? My name is Avery, and I'm in my late 20s. For most of my life, I've been the one people rely on, but never acknowledge. I learned early that keeping the peace mattered more than being seen. So I stayed calm. Useful. Predictable. When something went wrong, I fixed it quietly. When someone needed help, I didn't announce it, I just handled it. They mistook my silence for dependence. At that lunch, my mother kept talking. About independence. About adults needing to stand on their own. Each sentence landed heavier because she knew I wouldn't interrupt. My sister smiled into her drink. My uncle stared at his phone. Someone joked about how I'd figure things out like always. That part hurt more than the words. Because they were right, I always did. They just never asked how. I watched my mother soak in the attention, proud of herself. She thought she was setting me free. What she was really doing was showing everyone exactly how comfortable she felt dismissing me. And I let her. Because when people believe they have power over you, they stop being careful. They speak too freely. They forget who's been holding things together behind the scenes. I stayed quiet on purpose. Not because I was weak. But because I was paying attention. After my mother said it, something shifted in the room. Not sympathy. Permission. She had opened a door, and suddenly everyone felt allowed to step through it. My aunt laughed softly and said, "She's right, you know. You've always leaned on family a bit too much." Not cruel. Just careless. My sister tilted her head and added, "It's probably good for you. Independence builds character." She said it like advice, not accusation. That somehow made it worse. No one asked if I was okay. They talked about me, not to me. I noticed how relaxed they all looked. How comfortable. Like they were relieved to finally say what they'd rehearsed privately for years. My mother nodded along, encouraging it, enjoying how easily the room took her side. She was confident because she believed she held the ground beneath my feet. She didn't realize she was standing on something I'd been quietly supporting. The conversation moved on, but the tone didn't. Every joke had an edge. Every comment landed just close enough to remind me of my place. Someone mentioned rent prices out there. Someone else joked that moving back in later wouldn't be an option. They laughed. I smiled politely and sipped my drink. Inside, I was cataloging everything. Who spoke? Who stayed silent? Who avoided my eyes? Because arrogance leaves fingerprints. My mother stood up at one point to refill her glass and said, loudly, "She'll be fine. She always lands on her feet." Then she looked at me and added, "Won't you?" I met her eyes and said, "Yes." That answer satisfied her more than any apology could have. She wanted reassurance. She wanted proof she was right. And I gave it to her. That was the moment she stopped seeing me as a risk. In her mind, I'd already accepted defeat. Already begun adjusting. Already shrinking myself to fit the story she was telling. That's when people get sloppy. She started talking numbers. Not directly, but enough. Complaining about expenses. Mentioning how tight things had been lately. How lucky they were to have each other. I noticed how my sister suddenly grew quiet. How my uncle frowned slightly when money came up. How the table shifted uncomfortably, even as they pretended not to. They didn't connect the dots. They never had. Because I had always handled the uncomfortable parts privately. I never made a show of it. Never said, "This is on me now." I just took care of it and let them believe things magically worked out. My mother believed stability was inherited. She never questioned where it came from. By the time dessert arrived, she was glowing. The matriarch. The truth teller. The woman who'd finally drawn a line with the child who needed to grow up. She thought the story ended there. I excused myself quietly and walked down the hall. My suitcase was already half-packed from earlier visits. I finished it calmly, folded everything neatly, zipped it shut. When I came back into the room, suitcase in hand, the confidence on my mother's face flickered. "Already?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "You're right. I shouldn't rely on family." That sentence landed differently. The room went quiet again. Not awkward this time. Alert. I set the suitcase down and looked around once. Just once. Then I spoke, not emotionally, not loudly, just clearly. "I wanted to let everyone know," I said, "that since I'm leaving, all financial support I've been providing will stop today." At first, they didn't understand. Then realization started moving across faces like a slow wave. "What support?" my sister asked. I listed it. Calmly. Precisely. No drama. Just facts. The color drained from my mother's face. She opened her mouth, then stopped. For the first time that day, she looked unsure. I picked up my suitcase and walked out before anyone could find the right words. Behind me, the silence was heavier than any argument. And as I closed the door, they all believed the same thing. That I'd acted emotionally. That I'd regret it. That I'd just burned my bridge. What they didn't know was that I had already crossed it. The first night alone was quiet in a way that felt almost cruel. No arguments. No messages. Just the hum of the refrigerator in a borrowed apartment and my suitcase still sitting by the door like it didn't belong there. My phone stayed face down on the table. When I finally checked it, there were dozens of missed calls. My sister first. Then my mother. Then numbers I hadn't saved. Messages stacked on top of each other, each one more confused than the last. "What did you mean? Call me back. This isn't funny, Avery. You can't just abandon people like this." That last one made me laugh. Just once. Quietly. Because for years, I had been the one holding things together. Quietly fixing what broke. Quietly stepping in when money ran short or plans fell apart. Now that I'd stepped back, they called it abandonment. By morning, the tone changed. The messages weren't confused anymore. They were urgent. My sister's voice message came through first. She sounded shaken, trying to stay calm. "Hey, so, Mom's really upset. There's been a mix-up with the account. We just need to understand what's happening." Then my uncle. Short. Direct. "We need to talk. Today." My mother waited until afternoon. Her message was longer. Controlled. Careful. She didn't apologize. She didn't take back what she'd said. She just reminded me of everything she'd done for me growing up and how family doesn't turn its back when things get difficult. I listened to it twice. Then I deleted it. Because something else had already started happening. Bills bounced. Automatic payments failed. Quiet systems I'd set up years ago stopped working, one by one. Nothing dramatic. Just small disruptions that exposed how much had been resting on me the whole time. At the same time, my own world shrank. I watched my savings dip. I canceled subscriptions. I moved slower in stores, recalculating everything. For the first time, it looked like I had miscalculated. Like I'd acted on emotion and cut myself off from the only safety net I had. Friends asked careful questions. "Are you okay? Do you have a plan?" I told them I was fine. But alone, in that apartment, doubt crept in. What if I'd overestimated myself? What if they were right? What if independence cost more than I could afford? The silence pressed in. No family dinners. No calls asking for help. Just distance. Cold and final. From the outside, it looked like I'd lost everything in one afternoon. My family. My stability. My place. And the stories spreading among them reflected that. I heard later that my mother told people I'd stormed out. That I'd overreacted. That I'd always been sensitive about money and pride. They believed her. Because the person who could correct that narrative wasn't talking. And I let it stay that way. Because the calm I held onto didn't match defeat. I wasn't scrambling. I wasn't panicking. I was waiting. There were documents on my laptop I hadn't opened yet. Emails saved. Agreements drafted quietly over years. People who knew exactly where my money had gone and why. None of that showed on the surface. To everyone else, I looked like a woman who'd burned her bridge and fallen into the water. What they couldn't see was that I was already standing on something solid. And soon, they were going to realize just how deep the water was. On their side. 3 days after I left, I opened my laptop. Not because I was panicking. Because the timing was right. I scrolled past the missed calls and unopened emails and opened a folder I'd created years ago. It wasn't labeled anything dramatic. Just a neutral name that wouldn't catch attention. Inside were documents no one in my family knew existed. Every transfer I'd made had a reason attached to it. Notes. Dates. Email confirmations. Agreements, some informal, some very official. I had learned early that being helpful didn't mean being careless. When my mother had asked me to help out for a bit with the house, I hadn't just sent money. I'd structured it as a private loan. When my sister needed tuition covered, I'd insisted on paperwork for tax purposes. When my uncle's business needed a temporary boost, I'd routed it through an account tied to my consulting work. At the time, they'd teased me for being overly cautious. Now, that caution had weight. I made one phone call that afternoon. Then another. Both were short. Professional. Calm. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't explain the situation emotionally. I simply asked questions, confirmed timelines, and requested that certain protections be activated. Everything I did was legal. Everything was already in motion. While my family was still arguing about whether I'd acted out of pride or spite, systems they didn't understand were responding quietly. That night, my mother called again. This time, her voice wasn't firm. It wavered. She asked if I'd really meant what I said. She asked if we could talk as a family. She asked if I could just pause things for now until everyone calmed down. I told her I'd call her back. I didn't. Because for the first time, I could see the full picture. They hadn't just relied on me emotionally. They'd built their lives assuming I'd always be there financially, without ever acknowledging it, respecting it, or asking if I wanted that role. My silence had made it easy to forget my power. The next morning, something shifted on their end. My sister's tone changed completely. Her messages were careful now. Polite. She asked how I was doing. Said she hoped I was okay. Said she missed me. She didn't mention money. That told me everything. By the end of the week, my uncle requested a meeting. Not casual. Not friendly. Formal. I agreed. Not because I needed to. But because I wanted witnesses. I walked into that meeting calm, prepared, and completely detached from the outcome. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I let documents speak for me. I watched his confidence drain as he realized I hadn't been helping. I'd been investing. Protecting myself. Planning for a day exactly like this. He asked what I wanted. I told him the truth. I just want what's fair. That was the moment he understood something my mother still hadn't. This wasn't emotional. This was structural. And it was already too late to undo. They still thought they could fix it quietly. Smooth it over. Convince me to come back and restore things the way they were. They didn't realize the next step wouldn't happen in private. It would happen where it all started. At a table. With an audience. And nowhere left to hide. I didn't rush anything. That was the mistake they kept expecting me to make. Instead, I waited for the invitation. It came a week later, dressed up as concern. Another family gathering. Another holiday lunch, like nothing had fractured. Like words hadn't been said. Like I hadn't walked out with a suitcase and rewritten the balance of the room. My mother's message was polite. Almost gentle. She said she wanted everyone together. She said families shouldn't let misunderstandings stretch too far. She didn't apologize. She didn't need to. Because by then, I understood something clearly. Apologies were never the point. Control was. I agreed to come. Not to reconcile. To conclude. When I arrived, the table looked the same. The same dishes. The same seating. The same familiar comfort they all wrapped themselves in when they wanted things to feel normal again. But the energy was different. My sister kept checking her phone. My uncle avoided my eyes. My mother smiled too quickly, too often. The confidence she'd worn so easily last time didn't fit her anymore. I sat down quietly. No announcements. No tension on the surface. They talked about weather. About work. About nothing. That's when my mother made her move. She cleared her throat and said, "Before we eat, I just want to say, family supports each other. We don't keep score. We don't put conditions on love. Several heads nodded. She looked directly at me. Waiting. I didn't respond. So she kept going. She talked about sacrifices. About everything she'd done as a parent. About how hurt she'd been when I threatened to withdraw help instead of talking things through. She was careful with her words. Calm. Reasonable. The victim in her own story. She thought the room was hers again. I let her finish. Then I reached into my bag and placed a thin folder on the table. Not dramatically. Just there. I agree, I said softly. Family shouldn't keep score. Every eye moved to me. So I won't, I continued. I'll just clarify. I opened the folder and slid copies across the table. Not to everyone. Just enough. Documents. Statements. Agreements. Timelines. I didn't explain much. I didn't need to. The room changed in seconds. My sister's face drained. My uncle's hands tightened around his chair. My mother stopped smiling. I calmly explained that everything I'd provided had been voluntary, but structured. That I'd never hidden it. That if anyone had questions, they'd had years to ask. My mother interrupted me then. She raised her voice for the first time. So this is what this is about? Money? I looked at her and said, no. It's about respect. That landed harder than anything else I could have said. Because respect was the one thing she'd assumed she didn't need to give me. I told them I wasn't asking for anything back. I wasn't suing. I wasn't exposing anyone. I was just done participating in a system where my silence was mistaken for obligation. No one spoke. They couldn't. Because every word they might use to defend themselves was already written down in front of them. And then, without raising my voice, I delivered the last piece. I've already notified the necessary parties, I said. So this conversation isn't a negotiation. It's a courtesy. That's when my mother realized something terrifying. She didn't have control anymore. And the room knew it. The silence after that felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. My mother stared at the papers like they'd rearranged the room around her. For the first time, she didn't look angry. She looked exposed. She tried to laugh it off. A small, shaky sound. You're being dramatic, she said. This is family. You can't just turn things into contracts. I didn't argue. I just said, I didn't turn them into contracts. They always were. I just didn't talk about them. That was when it clicked for everyone else. The help hadn't been accidental. The stability hadn't been luck. And I hadn't been dependent. I'd been deliberate. My sister finally spoke, her voice tight. She asked if there was anything we could do to fix this. She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at my mother. That told me who she thought still had power. I stood up slowly. I don't want anything fixed, I said. I just want things honest. My mother stood too, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She tried one last time to take control. She raised her voice, reminded me who she was, reminded the room that she was my mother. And that was her collapse. Because instead of backing her up, no one spoke. No nods. No agreement. No rescue. They'd all seen the documents. They'd all understood what my silence had been hiding. And suddenly, her authority didn't sound like strength anymore. It sounded like assumption. She sat back down. The conversation never recovered. People ate quietly. Someone cleared plates too early. No one made eye contact. The family performance had ended, and there was nothing underneath it to replace it. I gathered my things and walked to the door. My mother didn't stop me. She couldn't. Outside, the air felt lighter. Not victorious. Not angry. Just clear. I didn't feel powerful because I'd taken something from them. I felt powerful because I'd finally stopped giving myself away without being seen. I didn't cut them off dramatically. I didn't disappear. I just stepped out of a role that had never been named, but always expected. And life adjusted. They figured things out. Slowly. Differently. Without me quietly filling the gaps. And I built a life where my calm wasn't mistaken for weakness, and my silence wasn't confused with need. What I learned was simple. Patience doesn't mean permission. Silence doesn't mean agreement. And independence isn't about leaving. Sometimes, it's about standing still long enough for the truth to catch up with everyone else. I never raised my voice. I never asked for revenge. I just packed my bag. and let reality do the rest.